Hi, everybody. Charles from GMAT Ninja here. Welcome to episode number 4 of our Epic Admission Stories. Here with me today, Sharon Joyce, decade or so at Fortuna Admissions, former Berkeley Haas Admissions Committee member, former Carnegie Mellon Tepper Admissions Committee member, doctorate in education, knows her stuff, been doing this a while. Sharon, thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks for having me, Charles.
All right, so the epic stories today. So 3 candidates, we have a 4th one we might get into. So we have Priya, so classic chopped up resume, 3 employers in 4 years, mostly lateral moves, not necessarily that sexy, 4-month gap in there somewhere. She got into some really good schools. Student number 2, we'll talk about Julio, no extracurriculars, no community involvement, no hobbies really. What do you do with that? How much does it matter? And candidate number 3, Anna, who's a physical therapist of all things. I love my physical therapist, but you don't see a lot of physical therapists getting to business school. So we'll talk about how all that happened, and time permitting, we have a bonus. If you are watching live, as always, fire away with questions. We will do our best to integrate those. All right, with that, candidate number 1, Priya, with her massive employment gaps. Go for it, Sharon.
So Priya, very interesting, super fun to work with. When we started our work together, she went to a very competitive undergraduate institution in Texas, and coming out of graduation, she landed a great job in the Bay Area with a more well-known tech company. During that time, though, she was doing some interesting projects, but through some networking, through her alumni association, she met an alum who had a startup doing some really cool things in the ed tech space. And so she decided to take a leap of faith and join the startup, really thinking that she'd be there for the duration. After about a year, though, things kind of started falling apart. They had to do some restructuring, and she lost her job. And this was also some time during COVID, not super easy to find positions. And so during that time, she was job searching, things like that. But as it turned out, she ended up having a 4-month gap until she was able to find another position, again, in more of a startup space, but a little bit more steady. When she came to me, though, her biggest concern was like, I have worked at 3 places in 4 years. I have a 4-month gap. And I'm just really concerned that this is going to be a red flag to admissions committees. And so, you know, in talking with her, really what we were trying to tweak out and play out of her resume, and also thinking about her work experiences when she's writing things and crafting things in her applications, really talking about like the impacts, though, that she was able to make during those brief stints that she had, and showing that she did bring value. You really want to turn that into sort of a sob story, into a story about resilience, particularly during COVID, though, too. I think that she was given a little bit more grace. What I said to her, though, in a very candid conversation, though, is if I were looking at you with my admissions committee cap on, if you will, I would be worried, though, are you looking at an MBA program as sort of a fallout shelter to kind of, you know, recalibrate and think about your next career move, since you've had a little bit of a rocky start, you know, being out of college just for a few years. But so we also wanted to make sure that there was some compelling evidence in her essays, in the way she talked about short-term and long-term goals, that an MBA was clearly always something that was going to be on her radar screen. And so again, just working really closely with her to be sure that we were saying things that would give the admissions committee good faith that this was something that she was always looking forward to doing. So put a lot of onus on her to make sure that when she was writing her statements about long-term and short-term goals, that she could track to some of the things that she was able to learn and do and create and be involved with at these 3 very different places, and how she was able to see different leadership styles, different metrics, things like that, that were actually pretty valuable. You know, in terms of classroom discussions, she's not going to add just one perspective from one place of work, but from 3 different, very diverse places. So really playing that up in terms of some of the things that she would be able to bring to the classroom, relative to some people who might have just been with Deloitte all 5 years leading up to joining business school, or with a bank or something like that. So really making sure that she could leverage those experiences she had, but then also too, because she had experienced these 3 different places, being able to see like, what are the gaps that I have? And I really want to be able to talk about those in my essays as well, in terms of if I'm admitted to your program, I really want to leverage these academic pieces, these co-curricular pieces, things about the culture that I really want to leverage. So in terms of working with her and crafting essays that really would help her shine, we played up the fact that she had been at these different places in order to really show an admissions committee that she was very self-reflective about like, gosh, I know I have a little bit of an unevenness, but these are some things that I was able to see at all these different places. And on that note, all of the schools that she applied to did give the bandwidth to talk about, is there anything that you would want to address and let the admissions committee know about? And so we wrote together, I helped her craft this kind of beautiful piece talking about the different moves that she had. And so I think that again showed the admissions committee that she was kind of self-aware that I might look a little bit non-traditional, but there are some good reasons why I made the choices that I made and why I landed where I did. And I'm really proud of some of the things that I learned and contributed to and how I made an impact while I was there. I think another thing to think about, though, too, is working through your letter writers. With all of our clients, we help them prepare templates for their letter writers to help guide their writing, certainly not to write the letters of recommendation for them, but as ways to give them some memory joggers in terms of, don't you remember the time I did X, Y, and Z? And so in the selection of her letter writers, I really impressed upon her, too, to be pretty choosy about who she was going to ask, and being sure too that they were able to convey the impact that she made at those different within those different organizations in a short period of time. So I think loud and clear she was able to come through and show that she was adaptable, that she was resilient, that she was really reflective about her career trajectory to date, and then also being very thoughtful and intentional about what she wanted to do moving forward, and connecting that very clearly to the schools that she was targeting to show how she would maximize that experience, as well as what she would bring into classroom discussions, to different clubs and organizations. And then also, being someone who would also be a strong alumna of that program as well and give back.
Sharon, can you say a little bit more, and I realize you might not want to say everything about this particular individual for privacy reasons. Can you say more about what her career vision was and how you presented that?
So with her career vision, she found that she really liked being in the ed tech space. And so it's a little bit niche, right? And so in terms of being intentional, like for the different schools she was applying to, we really pushed on her. And part of our curriculum at Fortuna is we have a career vision workshop, if you will, that our clients work through. And I really pushed on her to make sure when she was mapping to the different schools, identifying resources within those schools that she would want to leverage. If there's an ed tech club, do they do treks? Who are speakers who come in? If you are talking about wanting to go to a particular organization, who from that school is a graduate? Bonus points if what you're looking at was founded by someone who was, someone from Kellogg. And so I think just being really clear about where in tech she wanted to be, and thinking about the type of role that she wanted to have in terms of product development, and feeling like she had ownership over something was really important to her as well.
All right, getting a question from a live viewer that I think is interesting, and it's a little bit of a different situation than Priya. So Priya had three jobs in 4 years.
Yeah, and again,
had the 4-month gap. So the issue wasn't lack of experience; it was that it was very chopped up.
Yeah.
So and again, apologies for mispronunciations. Rishi Agarwal, recently completed undergrad. There's a gap year. Currently running a family business, and a little bit more color on that. Helping dad role is trying to acquire more B2B customers. So different sort of kind of chopped up or lack of professional experience. But how would you address something like this that doesn't necessarily look like your traditional, here's your wonderful 4 years at
I think the biggest takeaway, if you have any type of gap, if you were using that time though in a meaningful way, when you have a gap and you're able to explain it in a very rational, logical way to an admissions committee, and that you also can show some takeaways from that experience. I think that will still land well with an admissions committee. With the person who just posed that question, sometimes it's a little bit trickier if you've been spending time helping to build up a family company or family business, because obviously your dad shouldn't write you a letter of recommendation attesting to that. But if you have a great relationship with a client or a vendor or something like that could help bolster that you are using your time wisely during that gap. And so again, if there are gaps, I mean, again, have a good explanation. Admissions committees are not impressed if during your gap you took time to go surfing in Costa Rica for 4 months. In the case of Priya, she was obviously job searching during that time, but she also did some great volunteer work during that time as well, just to feel like she had some meaning outside of, looking at LinkedIn every day and networking. So I think as long as you use your time wisely during a gap and that you have some evidence to kind of back up that you did some things that were meaningful during that time, that won't discourage an M7 from looking at you.
Sharon, one of the fears I often hear from applicants who are in situations like the commenter Rishi, or in situations like Priya's, shaky work experience, chopped up, a gap year, whatever it might be, they often worry that when they get to the interview phase, if they get to the interview phase, that they're going to get grilled on it. Mm-hmm. So what would you say to somebody who's worried that, well, wait a minute, what if they start asking me hard questions about this? How do you prepare for that? How often does it happen?
I think as part of your preparation, again, go back and read the essays that you wrote. I mean, they got you in the door with your business school of your dreams, right? So go back and think about that and think about scripting some things. I think the biggest thing is to have your composure, keep your cool. And again, sticking to your story about resilience, the impacts that you were able to make during maybe shorter periods of time. And then also too, talk about some of the things, obviously, that you are learning almost immediate applicability of what you're doing in your MBA studies that's really helping to round out some of those initial skills that you had during your work experience leading up to business school. I mean, I think any MBA student will tell you though, like nobody ever feels 100% prepared anyway. So you definitely have to make sure that you're prepping with your classmates, taking advantage of the Career Center's resources for interview prep and things like that. I think the thing is not to feel like, and I think, a lot of people, we all have inklings of imposter syndrome, right? So I think it's, again, like being true to yourself and remembering all of the good things that you did while you were working in those different settings and what you can bring to that company, just similarly to what you could bring to that school and why they chose you.
All right. Question from Geeta. So we're going to come back to this. Can a healthcare worker opt for an MBA? Funny you should ask.
You could not have queued us up better. That's amazing. Thank you for that, Geeta.
We did not plant this person, but we do have a healthcare worker, a very interesting one that we'll talk about in just a moment. Before we get into that one, question that's a little bit off topic, but I'm happy to see Victoria. Victoria, awesome to see you. I think it's worth addressing just because anybody who's watching this here in 2026 is probably wondering, there's been a lot of weird stuff the last couple of years, especially for US programs. I can say that applications were way down in the previous cycle versus the one before. So the 2025-26, people applying the fall of 2025, applications were generally way down at US programs. Sharon, thoughts on how to think about this going forward, this next cycle starting in fall 2026? What do you think is going on, especially for international applicants?
I think we're still going to see not as many international students applying to schools in the US, particularly there's going to be some potential issues with optional practical training that just came out of the Department of Homeland Security the other day. So I think that that's something that international students definitely need to pay close attention to. And I think also before applying to schools or as part of your research is connecting with the career centers, looking at their stats online just so to see, they will oftentimes parse out the success of international students and use that as a guiding force to kind of figure out what are outcomes for students who are going there. I know we want international students. I think that one of the key features of going to a top flight MBA program is the the opportunities to network and have friends and classmates who will eventually maybe even be colleagues from all around the world. And so, hopefully this will just be a little blip on the radar screen, and that you get to a point where we're seeing folks coming from outside of the US back to, 40%, as incoming classes and things like that. So that would be my hope. We're still kind of waiting and seeing, at least at Fortuna, I'm still definitely coaching people from outside of the US.
And Sharon, I don't know about you, what I noticed in this previous cycle, so in this era of visa difficulties, of acute visa difficulties, we'll say here in the United States, I noticed that international applicants who maybe had some aspect of the visa situation taken care of, they already had permanent residency, their company was sponsoring them, and they knew that they would have a job afterwards and support for an H-1B visa or a job overseas. The schools are still very excited to have a diverse international cohort of students. I think schools are almost universally disappointed that the volume of international applicants has declined. And we've seen that the candidates who schools don't have to necessarily worry about in terms of their visa situation, but are still from somewhere outside the US, seem to me like they punched above their weight in the last cycle, and schools loved seeing them. I'm not sure if you had a similar experience.
I think so. I think though, also for anyone who is an international student who's thinking about coming, you definitely need to target round 1 and round 2. Like round 3 to me, because visa issues are a lot more complex and complicated. You don't want to get in and be so excited to go and then find out that you're hung up on paperwork and won't be able to start on time. And so I think it's a lot of like doing the research right away, kind of figuring out like, will I be able to do what I want to do? And will I also be able to get the requisite visa status in order to go? So I think it's a great question. I wish I had a crystal ball. But yes, things have been a little bit more difficult than they had been in the past. But I hope that this is just going to be a little bit of a blip. And then, in future cycles that we're going to see, again, a resurgence of interest of coming to the US and feeling welcome to come to the US, quite frankly.
All right. Thank you, Victoria. Awesome to see you. Okay. Applicant number 2. So we're going to jump straight to the healthcare professional wrongs layout. There we go. So Sharon, tell us about Anna, physical therapist.
Oh man, she was so great. She is so great. Super fun to work with. And when she came to me though, just so nervous. She was a doctor of physical therapy, went to a very, very competitive medical training in the US. Went to a very strong undergraduate institution. After practicing for a number of years in direct patient care as a physical therapist, she just was becoming kind of bored with it, was more interested in thinking about the business side of things, but then also just taking a look at healthcare on a more global scale, if you will, in terms of thinking about how she could make an impact, not just kind of a one-on-one, but really impacting healthcare. She was so hesitant, I think, to think about even doing that. She said, I don't speak the language of business. Like, I don't even know where I would begin. So a lot of hand-holding initially. Again, I think helping her through, though, a career vision to really think about what can she talk about for short-term, long-term plans. Doing some early research in terms of, schools who have even, concentrations or certificates in healthcare, thinking about connecting with student ambassadors who also have an interest in healthcare, just a lot of networking, so that she was beginning to kind of understand what are the opportunities, what is the language, things like that. I think, though, too, the power of working with a coach, though, is that I think sometimes there are things that we do in our day-to-day that we never think about labeling. And so in conversations with her, she did some really incredible things that really did have a bit of a business aspect to it. So for example, during COVID, she had to help her clinic quickly pivot and change their business model. She had oversight for opening a new location. So thinking about all of those different logistics, she had to be on top of looking at patient metrics in terms of their volume and figuring out working with marketing, like what are they going to do to get more people through the door? So she had a lot of strategic thinking. She had a lot of operational experience. She had some HR experience too. And so it was thinking about kind of repackaging her resume. Because at first, in writing her resume, she was writing more about like her direct patient care encounters, but really switching it more to thinking about what are some of the things that are more analytical that you did at work? What were some of the things that were more strategic in nature? How did you have to help HR sort through some different obstacles, particularly during COVID, things like that? So she actually had the language of business. She just wasn't used to pointing it out and calling it out. And so doing a lot of work again on making sure that her essays were able to talk about what she was witnessing. It's one thing to kind of say like, I was helping all these patients and now I want to move into business, but she really had to come up with some compelling reasons and some ideas in healthcare where she thinks she could make a difference more on a global scale. And so again, it was just kind of helping her with her language. There was also, in her letters of recommendation briefings, making sure, again, that she's a great practitioner and she was great with patients, very involved, but making sure that her letter writers were given some instructions about how to talk about the things that were more analytical, more strategic in her letters of recommendation to help with that framing as well. And she had great success. She got into a ton of programs. And there were just little things when we would just, when I was talking to her and listening to her and learning more about her stories, when some of the different essay prompts would come up, sometimes she would be stumped, like, I have no idea, what on earth would I say? And I'd be like, no, remember that story with, X, Y, and Z, like, that's perfect. Like, let's talk about that. Let's dig into that. And she ended up having a lot more fodder than I think she ever realized that she would have had otherwise.
Sharon, say more about where she got into.
She got into pretty much every place she applied to. And it was funny because I think early on she was afraid to apply to Ross and Darden and places like that. She got into those schools. She got into UCLA. She got into UT. She was not someone who would be kind of the Harvard, Stanford, Wharton. That just kind of wasn't her vibe anyway. And so she very happily landed at Ross, and she also got a very big scholarship. And so it was a very happy ending, very, very happy ending. You can read her review on me somewhere on the GMAT Club website. Look for someone who talks about being a physical therapist.
Awesome. Say more. You used the phrase a couple times, language, that you had to work on her language. Do you mean that just in the sense of how she wrote her essays? The reason I'm asking is initially when you mentioned it was in the context of her networking, and she's talking to different people who maybe had a connection to the MBA program or to career she was interested in healthcare. Was there something about the way she communicated overall that you were working on, or was it just limited to the essays themselves?
A little bit of both. I think giving her also like thinking about her own elevator pitch on how to approach people, like, hey, I'm a doctor of physical therapy, but here I am in front of you and I'm interested in business school. So being able to like the why are you interested in business school? She was thinking it's a great pathway. When she was starting to hear more about consulting careers in healthcare, that was really interesting to her to also have exposure to lots of different areas, lots of different functional roles, things like that. And so just, I think the networking piece was important to her in terms of thinking more about opportunities. I think in our work together, though, digging into her resume, like pulling out things that she was doing, like budgeting, thinking about growth initiatives, how to improve things. So again, pulling out some of the things that she was doing that had more of a managerial bent to it, and being able to parlay that in her resume as well. Because she really did a lot more than just direct patient care. She had a lot of oversight for a very busy operational clinic.
Okay, we'll come back to Geeta here. Can a healthcare worker offer an MBA? The answer here obviously is yes, that's very possible. Sharon, is there anything you'd like to say about business analytics in particular as a direction coming out of the healthcare industry?
Say more on that.
Well, just Geeta's asking about doing an MBA potentially in business analytics. And I think with Anna, the physical therapist, it sounds like a lot of the story was she was interested in much broader leadership roles within healthcare related consulting
Mhm.
as a starting point. And because there was enough tell me if this is incorrect. It sounds like part of what drove her to be interested in the MBA in the first place is that she already was a big picture thinker, somebody who thought about the organization and tried to have an impact on the organization and did. And she might not have thought of herself that way, but
Mhm.
it sounds very clearly that that's a big part of who she was, and it was a
Mhm.
big part of the story in her applications. I think what's interesting, and again, we're always reacting to a handful of words here in questions on these live streams, but I think the question that Gita is asking, can a healthcare worker offer an MBA? Obviously, very much so, as long as there is a way to connect what you've done with your career vision,
Mhm.
very, very possible. It sounds like she's interested in an MBA specifically focused on business analytics. And again, superficially here, that sounds like a harder pivot to me. And it's harder for me at a glance to understand how you might move from being a healthcare worker, presumably some sort of clinician, some sort of practitioner, to analytics specifically sounds like a different kind of jump.
I agree with that. I think that when we work with kind of all clients, regardless of their background, we really impress upon them that it's so helpful when admissions officers are reading your applications. If they can see evidence that you have thought about different functional roles, different job titles, and what type of industry that you would want to do that role. So I think as long as she's clear about where she might be targeting, to land after graduation, I think that could help. I think though, too, she would need to show some evidence of like what, again, has she researched within that program that she would want to leverage in order to get to that. Keep in mind, and it was interesting in my role at Tepper, I was in a hybrid role where I did admissions and I did career services. So when I was reading people, I would often think like, they sound great. I think they would bring a lot of zip and zest to the class, but are they going to be able to get a job? I don't think that they really understand what they're getting themselves into, or what we're really able to offer them based upon what they're telling me, at least in their written word of what they want to accomplish. So I think that it's really important if you are going from something that's very non-traditional into something that might seem a little bit out there from your background, to make sure that you have shown kind of a clear understanding of, you understand what it's going to take to get there. I think that sometimes too, if you do have a non-traditional background, I think it's really key to be able to show times when you have been able to take initiative and make things happen on your own a little bit more so. In career services and career recruitment and MBA programs, traditional companies come in, they put out their recruitment schedule, you drop a resume and hope to get invited. If you have a non-traditional background, it might take a little bit more for you to get onto some of those schedules. So making sure that while you're in school, you're going to the info sessions, that you're networking with alumni, that you're getting your name out there and your face in front of people who are going to be the deciders about who are we going to put on our recruitment schedules as well. So sometimes it's there's a little bit more onus on you to do your homework, to roll up your sleeves, and to really have that initiative if you are coming from a non-traditional background to make that happen. You can't just be passive, maybe more so than someone who has more of a traditional background and will like, they came from bank X or they came from consultancy Z, and like, yes, we're going to totally throw them on. We know what skill sets they already have, versus like, oh my gosh, this person was a doctor. What do they want to do business analytics for? So I think that it just is a little bit more homework on you to do that.
Okay, before we get into applicant number 3, this is a little off topic, but I think it's still worth addressing. So MIM, so Master's in Management, applicant, what would be a good score in the GMAT to target to get to the best business school? I don't think we need to get into the GMAT score bit. You can look those up. You can go see what the averages are at your target programs. That's no problem. I think the question that it would be interesting to hear your answer to, Sharon, is, we often talk in sort of the land of having conversations with admissions consultants. A lot of the conversations revolve around specifically MBA programs. Master's in Management, a little bit different because everybody's showing up with less experience typically. What might you do differently in those applications to maximize your odds?
I'm thinking about some of the clients who I have had who have done MBA, MIM, things like that. I mean, I think if you're targeting still like the more rigorous business school programs, you still need to be competitive, right? I think the thing that's important though is you need to be able to differentiate why are you targeting that program versus an MBA or versus a master's of science in something else, and be really clear about why that program, because it's very niche, it's very specialized. And I think that schools want to know that you want to be there, that you're not looking at it as a backdoor to get into another program, maybe even within that institution. So I think it's just making sure that you're really very laser focused on being able to talk about why that program specifically.
And since the question revolves around the GMAT, I think there's often a little bit of mythology out there that the GMAT really is the difference maker, and the way admissions committees, and Sharon, you've been on admissions committees, a couple of them, so please interrupt me if you disagree with this. Admissions committees, yes, take your scores seriously, take your academic background seriously, but a lot of that's about, are you going to succeed academically in this program? Okay, that's this little part of what it means to succeed in this program. And often I see people who might show up with amazing GMAT scores. They go and they crush it and they apply to the programs, and often get rejected because that clarity of vision about why you want to go to that program isn't there. So you really need both pieces, especially for something that's an early career master's program. Yes, you need the academic piece, test scores, transcripts, but the why still matters, I think, more than we might think sometimes.
It's that oomph factor, right? I think that, when we're reading applications, obviously you have to be able to pass a minimum threshold so that the schools have confidence that you will, you will persist, you will thrive, you will do that well, you can handle the rigorous coursework. But there's also, in the back of our minds, we're always thinking like, how is this person going to elevate the experience of those around them? Are they going to be someone who's participatory in class discussions, someone who will be coveted on team projects and group work, someone who shows that they want to get involved in some of the different co-curricular activities and that they're really going to give back to the community. And I think sometimes with a specialized program, that might even be a little bit more so. Some of them are shorter, so you have less of an amount of time to really make that connection quickly with the institution and with your classmates and things like that. So I think also it's a great point. I'm glad you brought it up in terms of thinking about not just the academic piece of it, but like I said, sort of that, what else are you going to bring to the table in terms of elevating the experience of others?
So again, apologies for mispronunciations. Faraz, please crush the GMAT too. Would love to hear about it once you do. All right. Candidate number 3, let's talk about Julio. So yeah, shaky, no extracurriculars. Interesting. Go for it, Sharon.
Oh man. So Julio, so smart, super smart. International background, but a US citizen. Very, very strong academically, very strong work experience, but didn't do a whole lot. And this is an even more interesting piece of their story, is that they applied in one cycle, got into some programs, got into some good programs, Kellogg, Tuck, places like that, but just really had their heart set on Wharton. And so when they came to me, it was like, okay, well, you'd be a reapplicant. Sometimes that's a little bit trickier. But in terms of talking through things, just not a whole lot of extracurricular activities, particularly after graduating from college. They did have some things in college, but by the time you matriculate, that's like 5 years ago. So we definitely talked through some of the things that they did in undergrad, and some of the schools will ask, basically list, things that you did from college to present. What we talked about though too was like, okay, so like hobbies and things like that, and things that you're doing within work. And this is a very valid thing though too. He actually had some things he was doing, but he didn't think he could really call those out. It turns out like within his place of work, he was really involved in helping with these annual like days of caring for the community. So putting together teams to go out within their community to do different things like playground cleanup and picking up trash and things like that. He also mentored someone in an informal capacity. It wasn't that he was told specifically to do this, but he went out of his way to help mentor someone who was new and more junior. And so we were finding ways to play up some of the things that he had done, even if these were things that, weren't maybe as splashy as some other volunteerism or things like that. What was important, though, is that the things that he did do in college, he did do over the span of 3 to 4 years. So I think that, committees, we're not really interested in seeing a huge laundry list of activities as long as you have some things that you showed some consistent dedication to. I think that that's more important. I'll never forget reading an application from someone. This is at Haas, we ended up putting some guardrails on how many opportunities and activities and involvement that you could list, because we had someone who put like literally 40 things. One of them was like walking their dog as an activity. One of them was organizing a ski share in Tahoe with friends. I mean, it just became kind of a little bit ridiculous that this person was just trying to show that they, I guess we're busy, but like I would hope that we all walk our dogs if we have them and not want credit for it. So getting back to Julio, I mean, I think we were able to show that he did have some things that he did as an undergrad that he was consistently involved with. And then within work, given the nature of what he was doing, I think that he was given a little bit of grace though too, knowing that he was working crazy hours. And so it was not as easy for him to do things as a working adult, but within his workspace, he was doing some things to contribute to that community within his workspace. Again, through having some oversight for this volunteering opportunities that the firm was engaged with, as well as mentoring someone who was more junior. And I wanted to be sure though too, that he was able to articulate, because in some form or fashion, you will talk about like, what do you want to do in terms of different clubs and extracurricular activities in undergrad. Having him, again, don't throw out a whole laundry list. Schools do not want to see that you've regurgitated their website of everything under the sun, but picking 2 things that would be meaningful to you and where you really would see yourself contributing to, he was able to identify at every school that he applied to, 2 or 3 ways that he would really want to get back into being able to give back. And he was successful getting into Wharton, second time around working together. And again, pretty active now. One thing though too that was really kind of a funny thing to think about though too, because he's like, I don't really do anything. I don't have that many hobbies. I don't have time. He's really into Christmas markets. He has a side little website where he would go to different Christmas markets around the world and rate them and rank them and post pictures and things like that. I'm like, oh my gosh, we totally have to talk about that. Like, that's a crazy cool hobby. We put it on his resume. It was a topic of conversation in pretty much every MBA interview that he had. So I do think it's good to have another section with kind of a fun, playful little tidbit, because that tends to be, an icebreaker when you're invited to interview. And so he's a success story and really, really fun to work with. And again, I think sometimes too, we tend to be sometimes too modest about stuff. Like the more I started unpacking this Christmas market thing, I'm like, this is crazy. This is fun. Like, we need to talk about this more. I think he was a little bit like, oh, it's kind of nerdy. It's kind of weird. Like, who wants to hear about that? Like, oh my gosh, like, yeah, we need to totally talk about that. It's cool.
But Christmas markets are awesome. That's a great thing to put in.
Mm-hmm.
Sharon, can you say a little bit more about, more broadly, why do these extracurriculars matter in admissions? It's a professional degree, right? So you're trying to get a job somewhere amazing, corporate. Like, why do the extracurriculars make a difference?
I think they make a difference because it's a way to really augment what you're learning in the classroom. For the clubs and activities that have more of a professional bent to them, it's a great way to network. It's a great way to kind of hearten yourself to your institution, hearten yourself to your classmates, again, who will someday be colleagues potentially. And I think though for the social ones too, again, it's a way to feel really steeped in the program, to participate in sort of the traditions, the ethos of those schools. Some of the extracurricular activities or even competitions among MBA programs, so different case competitions. There's the MBA Olympics, things like that. And so I think it's a way to, again, just demonstrate that you're not just there to go to class and absorb all you can and go away. That would be one thing that used to kind of be a little bit off-putting if I was reading an application and all I was hearing is like what I plan to take, but no commentary about what I plan to give back. And I think though too, by and large, a lot of people who are applying to business school programs are really cool, interesting, well-rounded people. They go to Christmas markets, they do, things like that. It's not uncommon for, every MBA class that I worked at, like there was some sort of garage band at some point because people enjoyed playing music together or putting together, a little quintet that would maybe go to a nursing home once a month. I think that by and large, these are people who are very successful, very well-rounded, and who enjoy giving back, for the sake of giving back, who enjoy, having cooking classes with friends or going to wineries in the Bay Area, who also want to plan trips for themselves and for their classmates to go visit different firms to help each other practice for case interviews, things like that. And so, I think that, again, the schools are not interested in someone who just wants to come to class and then go home. They really want people who are going to contribute to the program and contribute to those around them.
Sharon, since you've been on admissions committees and you've sat there with the giant stack of applications that you have to sift through, to what extent do the extracurriculars play a role that maybe is a little bit more subtle psychologically almost for you instead of an admissions requirement, that when you read a story about an interesting person who is documenting visits to night markets in 32 countries, how much of it is, I just read a whole lot of essays about spreadsheets and investment banks. I want to talk to this person. How much of that happened for you when you're reading these applications?
I think it's the realization I was reading 30 applications a day, 3 days a week from October until the end of April. So in a cycle, I would read easily 2,500 to 3,000 applications.
Wow.
And I knew every day going into that day of reading that I was maybe going to put 5 people forward potentially to be invited to interview. So I think that extracurriculars and hobbies and the things that we choose to share about who we are outside of our short-term and long-term goals, I think that that's the piece that helps make an emotional connection with whomever is reading you on the other side of the screen. And sometimes you even get a cute nickname. So for example, there was, a woman who was this amazing bread baker. So in my mind, I'm like, oh, that's that baker girl, right? And so I think that it's a way to be a little bit more memorable. There also just needs to be a depth of sincerity. As I mentioned, the person who, listed 40 things and some of them just were so insignificant and very surface, that's going to actually have you remembered in a not so great way of come on now, let's be a little bit realistic about this. And I think though too, getting back to what schools are also looking back, is the depth of it, but also, the sincerity and also the time commitment to it as well. This one's a little bit trickier, right, though, because, if you haven't thought about your extracurricular activities and you're in the application process right now and you don't have a lot, it's not like you can just all of a sudden be like, I'm going to become a big brother or big sister, and do this, in a way that's just very transparently, transactional to look good to an admissions committee. In some cases, I would say don't do that actually, go with what you have, maybe pull out more hobbies. Think again, like we did with Julio, about some of the things that you're doing within the workspace that could, really show that you are aware of the importance of giving back to your surrounding community, whether that's your work community, whether that's a website about Christmas markets, things like that.
All right. Should we do one bonus one?
I think so.
Let's do it. All right. We'll go through this one pretty quickly in the interest of time. Danny just hadn't done a whole lot of math, and music major, awesome, marketing experience, cool. Sounds like a guy you want to hang out with. But I think we see this sort of thing not infrequently, people who maybe feel really nervous about, I don't have a quant background, The answer I think people tend to pull from the interwebs is, well, crush the GMAT and that's that. And then what if you get an average score. Is there anything you can do at that point if you're the person without a quant background and your score is kind of just okay?
Absolutely. I think in Danny's case, he was really cool. He is really cool. And, he had a lot of cool extracurriculars, going back to what we were just talking about, like definitely had a rock band, things like that. Working with YouTube and marketing, just some really exceptional experience. And he was different. I mean, I think the thing though, too, is again, when people feel like they're imposters or like, gosh, I don't even know, like, will they even look at me? Like, I'm not coming from McKinsey. I'm not coming from Goldman, YouTube thankfully is well known. But he was just, I think a little bit worried about his experience, but in delving into things and then also really pushing upon him to also ask for projects within his workspace where he would be encouraged to use, analytical skills, quantitative skills to think about forecasting and marketing and impacts and looking at their data from sales and things like that, that was important for him to get some more bullets on his resume that did have a little bit of a quantitative bent to it. In his case, he did well on the GMAT, but I still told him, take MBA math, and we need you to complete it before you submit. There was nothing worse than reading an application when they're like, and if I'm admitted, I'll take MBA math. Like, that is not helpful for me to evaluate your quantitative readiness. So he was able to take that. And again, his GMAT score indicated that on the quant side that he would have been fine. But I think that taking something like MBA math or taking a stat class or an accounting class or finance, like there's lots of places you can do them. The UCs have a lot of online courses, MBA math, all the MBA programs are familiar with it, Harvard, Wharton, Coursera. There's lots of different ways that you can do that. It is a signal to an MBA program of, I know what is going to be expected of me. And so I'm going to show you evidence of my abilities before I even get to your program. So in his case, even though he did well on the quant side of the GMAT, we still pushed to get the MBA math done before submitting. So again, he had some more evidence of quantitative preparedness before he was going to start the program. So this one's kind of I don't know, not an easy one, but I think that it's, again, the onus is on you to prove to an admissions committee that you will be fine, that you'll be able to handle the rigors of the program. And so there's lots of different ways of doing that. And again, as I mentioned, though, making sure that you have any of that coursework completed before you hit submit. It's not effective. It's not useful to say basically the check is in the mail. Like, I am reading your file today. I need to see evidence of it today. And then also too, thinking about playing up some of the things on your resume that you did do that had more of an analytical framework. And then also, getting back to what we were saying about Priya, having your letter writers echo the ways and the times that you were comfortable with quantitative analysis to perform at your job.
Sharon, any preferences? You mentioned MBAmath.com, which is, I think, probably the most widely recognized pre-MBA quant course. Obviously, it's designed for that. As a former admissions committee member, do you have a preference for something like that versus something like a stats, microecon, accounting class taken at your local community college or University of California Extension or whatever it might be?
The University of California Extension courses, I think, are quite good as well. I would be careful if you're taking anything like stat, make sure that it is in a department of mathematics, not psych or social sciences. I just think that will be a little bit more rigorous. And if you ever have a question though, too, we were happy in our office. We had a team of admissions specialists who would read a course description and give you feedback and say like, yes, this is great. Or can you find one that's maybe a little bit, like, again, in a department of mathematics versus psychology. So when in doubt, send the course description to the admissions office and have them take a look at it. And then when they approve it, keep that email. You might want to submit it at some point, like, hey, and I took this, and with my conversation with so-and-so at your office, they said that this would be completely appropriate and would be well regarded within the review process.
All right, Sharon, thank you so much for doing this. Final thing, where do people find you?
We do all sorts of consultations. So send an email or reach out to us at fortunaadmissions.com. And again, we are happy to do a free 30-minute consultation to give you our perspective and talk to you a little bit about how we could partner with you on your MBA journey. We have an amazing team. All of our team members have worked at the top business school programs across the US, Europe, and we, I think, are so strong in terms of not just our coaching work, but we're so lucky that we also can lean on each other in our coaching practice to make sure that we do right by our clients. And we, I think, have some of the happiest clients who end up with some really, really amazing results working with our firm.
Awesome. Love it. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, everybody, for watching. If you enjoyed this, we have one more live episode in this series coming up next Wednesday if you're watching this in July 2026. So Wednesday, July 29th, usual time, 8:30 a.m. U.S. Pacific time, 11:30 Eastern. Other times, other places, all that good stuff. And if there's anything you want to see in the live series, GMAT Ninja Wednesdays, please tag me. We're on all the socials and obviously on GMAT Club at GMAT Ninja. Thank you for watching, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.